There you go. Sorry about that. I've had some weird thing with YouTube keeps connecting me to the wrong stream for some reason. But it was weird. It was like a little time travel. I was back at Folky Fridays number 29 way back, whenever that was, back in the summer. Very strange. Don't know what's going on there. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in. Hey up, Ed. Don't know if you saw the thing before. I did say before, how are you doing? But I think I was probably on the wrong one at that point, so I hope you're well over there. Hello to everybody else who's on there. Today is open session for Folky Fridays, which basically means third time's a charm. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, basically means you can throw any questions you've got about Irish guitar at me, or Celtic guitar in general. Other kind of UK folk music. I'm happy to talk about anything really. If anyone's got any things that have been causing them problems, anything you find difficult, or anything you'd like to know more about, I would love to hear what your problems are, and perhaps I'll have something helpful that I can show you to help with those, or I can point you in the direction of some other free resources that might help you out with them. Hey up, Keith, thanks for tuning in. So yeah, if anyone's got any questions or anything that's been bugging them, stick them in the comments and we'll see what we can do. Hey Frank, good to see you again. If no one's got anything particular to start off with, I could just show you a little sneak preview of some of the techniques that I'm going to use in tomorrow's video. Oh, any tips for learning scales and the various modes? Alright, I won't do that then. Yeah, nice one. Cheers, Brian. Any tips for learning scales for the various modes? Yes. There's two really important aspects to learning about the modes. One of them is getting the sounds of them into your head. In fact, there's three really important aspects. This kind of goes back to my little Venn diagram thing that I drew a little while ago. I kind of think there's like a little Venn diagram like that, and every time you tackle a new topic, you can kind of consider how you can fit that topic into each circle on the diagram, and then you think about any exercises you can do where you'll be sat in this little point in the middle where you've got aspects from all three taking place at the same time. So with the modes, your theory element is understanding that modes can contain the same notes as one another and how they relate to one another in that way. That's really important. For that, I made a video that explains that, and I made another video that explains how the chords fit together with that. So those two videos, if you go on the Folk Friend website and have a look on the videos page, there's a music theory section there, and those two are linked there. They're called Complete Beginner's Guide to Celtic Music Theory Part 1, and then I think the other part's called Part 2. They're not very original names, but so yeah, that's one thing. Then you've got the ear training side, which is probably the most important bit, written in unhelpful green pen that you can't read very clearly. The ear training, my top tip for that one is, as you're playing through a mode shape, if you're doing G Ionian for example, sing it while you play it. Da 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 aside from enhancing your vocal range, that's mainly really useful because it's getting the sound of a note and, importantly, how that note relates to the previous note in your head at the same time as you're doing the finger movement for it. So you're associating that gap on the fretboard, you're associating the interval from the previous note with a shape on the fretboard, and you're also associating relative to my root note, if I want my third, da da, you're associating how the finger placement relates to your starting point. One thing I will say with that as well is, as you're playing the Ionian mode, for example, if you're going through da da dum, make sure you've got the right fingering, which is middle, index, middle, little finger. And if you can hold down that first finger, that gives you a way to relate the other notes to the root note, because when you hear a melody, really what you're doing always is relating the notes that you hear to the root note in order to interpret their kind of emotional content, you know. So it's not important that you're hearing G and then B, it's important that you're hearing a root and then a major third. You could be hearing A and then C sharp and you'd still feel the same about it, you'd still feel bright and cheery and major thirdy. But yeah, so when you're learning the scales for the modes, the other thing is the practical element. And the best way to do that, I've put all the mode shapes up on the Finale Guitar website in the past as free downloads, I think. Let me have a look and see if I can find that for you. I'll stick a link to it in the box. I think you can download them all for free on there as well, so help yourselves if you want to learn these. They are really handy. It's a little bit slow to load, but I'll copy the link and I'll put it in the box. The no-no chords. I like your idea of no-no chords, Frank, and we'll get onto that in a minute. Yeah, so anyway, when you're learning the mode shapes, if you could play a G major scale down here, for example, and obviously that would be more practical if you wanted to apply it to learn melodies. But what I suggest if you generally want to become a better guitarist is learn the shape where you've got every single note fretted, and that shape is available free in the link that I've just put in the comments. Finger it with index, middle, little, always, for all the strings, apart from the B string, which is just middle and little. Because when you learn that shape, you can then learn the next shape, which is A Dorian, and that is also free on that link. Like that. The reason those two are learned together is because A Dorian has got the same notes in it as G Ionian does, and if you learn one, and then when you run out of fingers, move up into the next one, and come back down, A Dorian. That way, you're doing two things at the same time. Number one, you're training your muscle memory that if it runs out of fingers within one shape, it's got a neighbouring shape which is the same notes. As well as that, you're training your ear, because when you play the A Dorian shape, your ear will be hearing G Ionian because you've played the G root note at the beginning. Like that. But then if you play the A root note at the beginning, your ear will switch modes and it'll hear it as A Dorian, because your ear always interprets the content of a melody based on what the root note is. And if you're playing scales, that's the one at the beginning and the end. So that's really, really useful. You're kind of killing two birds with one stone there, or knitting two birds cardigans for the animal-friendly audience members, or whatever. Yeah. Practical exercises for learning those, as well as just playing through them, and then playing through the neighbours. If you learn all 7 of the mode shapes, I would recommend do them 2 at a time, so that you've got 2 neighbours which you can slide between always. For example, if you learned all the ones related to G, you'd be doing G Ionian, A Dorian, B Phrygian, C Lydian, and so on, and D Mixolydian. But the really important ones for folk music are the 4 folk ones, so Ionian, Dorian, Mixolydian, Aeolian. So maybe you might want to learn those first. Mixolydian and Aeolian, learn them together because, for example, A Mixolydian is the same notes as B Aeolian, so they're adjacent shapes, which is useful. And then you can go up into the Aeolian shape and come down that one. Yeah, like that. Yeah, so if you can learn the adjacent ones together, that's good. And when you're first practicing those as well, I would say a useful thing to do is practice them slowly but with a metronome, so that you're keeping all your notes nice and equally spaced. And try and let the notes ring out, you know, play it legato, so rather than that kind of thing, you want to be nice and smooth. Another thing I would say is, I invented a thing called the Folk Friend Practice Diary, because I realised, like a lot of my students, struggle to keep the motivation up, and it's really handy to keep a little diary of, on this day I practiced X, and on this day I practiced Y, and whatever. And you can find these on Amazon in every country. If you go on your type of Amazon and type in Folk Friend Practice Diary, you'll find it. A really good thing to do is quantify. So if you start out and you can play it at like 60 beats per minute, let's say, if you keep a note, on Monday I played it 10 times at 60 beats per minute, and then make yourself do it every day, and keep a note, Tuesday I played it at 60, Wednesday I played it 62, Friday I played it 130, you know. By the end of a few weeks of it, you'll be able to see that progression, and that way you feel like you're getting somewhere. Also, if you can always set an end point for every goal, if your goal is to learn about modes, that's very vague, but if your goal is I want to be able to play the 4 folk modes, then that's quantifiable. And even better would be, I want to play each one at 90 beats per minute and remember the shape and be able to sing it. And practice playing a root note and then singing the different modes of it as well, because that is really improving your ear, and that'll help you recognise what modes tunes are in. So if I play an A note, I could do da 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 da. That would be Ionian. Or I could do Dorian. Da 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 da. Like that. Or I could do Mixolydian. Da 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 da. Or I could do Aeolian. Da 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 da. Like that. So yeah, that's a really good practice as well. Can you learn the scale and link it with chord 1 in its different voicing? I think I know what you mean there, Brian. If you learn the scale using this mode shape, then it's useful to build a picture of how that mode shape fits over the bar chord. And you can see there, you can kind of get most of the scale notes over the top of the bar chord. That's quite an advanced thing and not that useful for folk guitar, but it is useful if you want to write arrangements and stuff like that, because sometimes you'll need a bar chord with some tune notes over the top of it. The other thing you can do, if you're thinking about fingerstyle arranging or practically strumming along with a tune and playing chords and a counter melody at the same time, it's useful to learn things like this G shape. If I play a G, a normal G chord in standard tuning, I know that I can get a scale and keep my root note down at the bottom. So you can use that for those kinds of, I know that's not a folk tune, but you can use that for those kinds of things where you want to keep a chord going at the bottom and play the scale over the top to get something from the tune, or maybe just a little element from the melody in there or something like that. That's useful. And you can practice doing that for chord 1 in any key. The easiest one is probably G, I would say. D is doable as well. So yeah, if you think about working out a major scale and trying to hold down as much of the chord as possible with it, that's a handy thing to do. And likewise for the minor scales, you know, or the Dorian mode, other key chords. I don't know if that's what you meant, but yeah. Let's move on. What else have we got? Sean Morris. Oh, he's gone. Okay. I know Sean said something about tunes in D when you start on A or something like that. That's quite an interesting. I thought that was quite an interesting point. There's a lot of tunes. Well, not that many in the grand scheme of things, but there are some tunes where it's actually in the key of D, for example, but it starts very strongly on a G chord or on an A chord. One that springs to my mind is, I can't remember what Sean's one was, but there's that very popular tune that goes... etc. So that starts on a big G. Dun 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 dum. I mean, it goes from D down to B, dum bum bum, and then to A. But chord-wise, it really sounds like it starts on chord 4. It's a thing to watch out for. I don't really have any top tips about it, apart from just always listen to a tune all the way through once before you start trying to accompany it, because the chord that fits under the most of it will be your key chord. It may not start on the key chord, but it will always want to end on the key chord. So if you hear a chord that feels comfortable under a lot of it, and it fits nicely at the end, that's probably your key chord. Oh. What else have we got? Frank says, I've often wondered in each mode how many chords are a complete no-no. Is there a pattern for finding the no-no chords? Yeah. Okay, so your starting point for finding the chords is whatever mode the tune is in. Buy a mode wheel and use it. No, you don't have to buy a mode wheel, but the mode wheel is a product which I invented, which you can use to find the chords quickly, and it is quite handy. So if you haven't got one already, have a look at them. I will put them in the box just there. So if let's say you've got a tune in the key of D, I mean, your stock chords for that would be those there. So in a major key, your chords 1, 4 and 5 are always the main ones. They're all major. For D, that's D, G and A. And then your other options would be their related minors. So B minor for D, E minor for G, and F sharp minor for A. So that's your 6 chords you can use in that key. However, there are obviously loads of other chord options available as well, and I've talked about them in lots of my other videos. The more complicated stuff, like using little chromatic shifts, putting diminished chords on the semitones between diatonic chords, stuff like that, and likewise putting dominant 7 chords between diatonic chords if you're going down. So I suppose the safe chords are your 6 diatonic ones for the key, by which I mean the 6 chords that you can make out of the notes of the key's scale. So for D major, that's your list. That also means that for E Dorian, you've got the same list, because E Dorian is the same notes and therefore the same chords as D major, and so on. but theoretically you can use almost any chord in passing. It's just got to be in the right context. Let me think of chords that you definitely couldn't use. If we're in the key of D, I might go from D. The first chromatic thing I often do is, if I was going from chord 4 to chord 5, you've got a major chord as chord 4, and you've got a major chord a tone up as chord 5. So you can slide your chord 4 up a semitone and then up another semitone, and that makes a nice little chromatic shift. So if I'm doing D... Oh, let me go back into standard tuning actually. So if I'm doing D, G and A, I could just slide my G chord up to, and that would give me a nice little chromatic shift. So G, G sharp, A. Obviously there's no G sharp in the key of D, but in context it works okay because it's chromatically linking two chords that are separated by a tone. And if you've got two chords of the same type, then you can always do that slide between them. So another place I could do it in the key of D major, my chord 2 is E minor, and my chord 3 is F sharp minor. So if I wanted to go from F sharp minor to E minor, that would be really nice, just slide it. And obviously the other way round would work as well. So if I was playing D, F sharp minor, E minor, A major, that's a nice satisfying kind of pop music chord progression. I could do a little chromatic shift. Something like that. So yeah, if you look at the list of chords available in a key, anytime you've got two of the same type that are a tone apart, you can link them chromatically by just sliding one into the other, and it'll always sound nice. That's true in any mode, by the way, as well, you know. So if we're in, let's say, E Dorian, because that's the same ones, so now we could slide the same things as before, you know, we could slide chord 3 G major into chord 4 A. So yeah, you get the idea, you know, you can always do it. Chords that we definitely couldn't use then. One thing that would sound terrible is if I was doing some sort of chromatic shift, if I had G major and A major and I wanted to chromatically shift between them, you couldn't play a minor chord as the middle one, because it's a major chord to another major chord. Putting a minor chord in the middle is going to make a big nasty jump in you. It's just not the. It's better with majors all the way through. So there are some things you can't do, but it's basically, number one is chords which use notes from outside the scale are generally to be avoided, but not always, because there's quite a lot of contexts that I've talked about in previous videos where you can get away with it. Let me think of some chords that you definitely can't use. So in D, we could theoretically borrow from Mixolydian, so we could have borrow from Aeolian as well. This is a very hard question actually, Frank. I don't think, in the infinite possibilities of what you can do, there's actually, if it's the right context, you can do almost anything. But if you aren't certain of the context, a lot of the options that might sound good in the right context will sound awful in a slightly different context. So that's about it really. Your basic starting point is use the list from the mode wheel, or watch the music theory videos to find out which chords go together the best. And then beyond that, you can start throwing in things like your dominant 7 chords, diminished chords, chromatic links, these kind of more jazzy techniques. and once you've got a handle on those, basically there are no wrong answers, but only if the context is right. Yeah, so sorry, that probably wasn't that helpful an answer, but I hope there's something useful there for you. If anyone is interested in these kind of chromatic links as well, the things like the dominant chords going down and diminished chords going up, I don't get to talk about them very much, and I would love to take this opportunity if you are interested in those. But maybe we'll come back to them in a bit if anyone's interested. Mick Tasty, wrist exercises for the strumming hand. Yeah, definitely. Let's have a look. First thing is just like have a good stretch before you start. Do your jellyfish stretch. You know, let your whole upper body go as floppy as you can. Flop your arms about like you're a jellyfish. I like to amuse myself by going like that, but you don't have to do that part if you've got neighbours or live with people that will think you're weird. But yeah, generally just try and let go of as much tension as you can. Potentially, you know, get a massage or something. That might help. And then when it comes to strumming, you want to strum from your elbow. If your guitar and your body are of roughly similar dimensions to mine, you want to strum with your elbow just hooked over the front of the guitar, so that the whole of your arm from here downwards can be moving up and down like that. And you want that wrist to be as soft as you can, and especially for Irish music. I mean, if you look at players like John Doyle particularly, plays almost entirely from the wrist. He doesn't really move his forearm very much, but they're doing, a lot of the players are playing very lightly, and they're just playing with the wrist. You see these kinds of things going on, and personally I like to move my whole arm a bit more, but the wrist thing is really important. The more you can practice just letting that wrist really go as floppy as you can, and if you, particularly for jigs, if you subscribe to the traditional jig pattern that you see people doing, where they do down up down down up down down up down down up down, it's kind of like the wrist joint is leading the strum, so it's always the wrist is always one quaver ahead of the rest of the strum. If this part of your hand is doing a down, your wrist is kind of going up slightly because it's flopping like that, and then it's flopping like that. So one thing that you could practice is just trying to let your hand go like a paintbrush. It's kind of like the bristles, you know. And letting that wrist go as floppy as you can. Again, with that, you know, I'd say keep a diary of your practicing. Get a Folk Friend practice diary if you want one that's full of chord diagrams and useful tips and scale shapes. All the modes are in this, by the way, and it's also got all the notes pages are in the format where you can write tabs or chord diagrams on them. So yeah, they're pretty handy. But if you keep a metronome running and keep a record of how fast you were comfortable with doing it, and then you can chart your progress over time, you know, that'll probably really help with the strumming as well. As for actual exercises, I would say a really good thing to do is just do your stretches. If you look up on YouTube wrist stretches for guitarists, there's hundreds of them, and they are really good. Forearm stretches, particularly for Irish guitar, you know, you'll find all sorts of good forearm stretches and things that are designed to loosen up your wrists. I haven't got any specific ones that I like, but yeah, I would say that's a good thing to look into if you're just starting out as well. And the other thing is, don't practice too much, because if you practice loads, you'll get more and more tension in that wrist over time if you are practicing these kind of wrist-based, very traditional patterns. So if you practice for too long, you're going to lose that soft wrist technique, And the more you can avoid that, the better, because if you get used to practicing long periods, you'll be getting better and better at practicing without the soft wrist. And if you get really good at practicing without the soft wrist, there's a certain threshold above which you can't really advance much further with that, because the supple wrist can move a lot faster than the lactic acid filled frozen wrist can, you know. So I guess, yeah, don't practice for too long, but practice little and often if you're working on your wrist technique for strumming. Frank, recent vids of yours, it seems that almost any chord can be used anywhere. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, Frank. Almost any chord can be used anywhere, really. The basic principle is, I know in my first book that I had I did a table towards the end where it says in a chord 1 section you can play this huge list of chords. No problem, Mick. And then it says in a chord 4 section you can play this slightly smaller list of chords, and in a chord 5 section you can play basically just chord 5, or if you're in a minor key, chord 5 or its related major, or Mixolydian. Beyond that then, so that's your starting point. Pretty much, if it's not a strong chord 4 section, you have to start with chord 1, but beyond that, the world is your oyster. You can literally play any of the other chords within the key. So if you have a tune where there aren't any strong chord 4 sections, basically go nuts, you know. But some orders of chords will work better than others, and that's because chords in their own right are A, an accompaniment to the melody, but B, a set of little melodies within themselves. So there's things like running up and down the chord scale will always work. Or down. So that's just playing all the chords within the key in order. That always sounds nice. Then beyond that, you've got these kinds of chromatic shifts, and I am going to talk a little bit about these because I think they're really cool. So if I was running through a G major chord scale, my main chords G, C, D, my minor chords A minor, B minor and E minor. So if I play those in order, A minor, B minor, C major, D, E minor. That's a D chord with an F sharp in the bass, just so we've got a nice substitute for the 7 chord. And then back to G. If I wanted to chromatically link those going up, I could put a diminished chord on the G sharp, so 1 semitone above my starting point, and then go to A minor. Then I could put a diminished chord or something resembling one, which is convenient to finger. I'm going to do that, that'll do. It's not a diminished chord, but it's close enough. So that's basically what I'm doing, is between every 2 chords that are separated by a tone, I'm putting a diminished chord in between, and that makes nice little links. B to C are separated by a semitone, so I can't do it there. I could do it between C and D, between D and E, because that's between E minor up to F sharp, I've got another tone, so I can do it there. Something like that. As you can see from my greater fluidity on the bottom string, I pretty much generally do it with the roots on the bottom string because it's easier to slide between them. But it's a thing to think about anyway. If you want to practice chromatic chord scales to get some really unusual chord progressions, find some good, easy to play voicings for diminished chords on the interwebs, and just try experimenting with putting them between any two chords in your progression that are separated by a tone. That only works if you're going up. So if you're coming down the chord scale, you have to do 7 chords instead. So if I was going down, I'd go G, D over F sharp, and then separating F sharp from E, there's a semitone there, so I'll put a 7 chord on that, which is F7. That leads me down nicely into E minor. From E, I'd go D sharp 7 down to D. And then if I'm going from D down to C, C sharp 7, C. B minor down to A. I can put a B flat 7 in there. Sorry, A minor. And I can put a G sharp 7 between A minor going back to G. So that's a fun little thing to play about with. Just quickly on the subject of that G sharp 7, a couple of weeks ago I did one of these streams and somebody came on it and he asked about tritone substitutions. And at the time I was very sleepy and I couldn't think what he was talking about. And I couldn't think of any examples. So I kind of just mumbled something, I think. But if you're in a major key, your chord 5 can always be a 7 chord. Like D7 if we're in the key of G. And a tritone substitution for that D7. If we go 3 tones down from that, so there's D, C, 1 tone, B flat, another tone, and then G sharp is the 3rd tone. And if we play a G sharp 7, that will actually work as a very jazzy tritone substitution for our chord 5. So if I was doing really jazzy chords in the key of G major, I might start on G major 7, and I could do G sharp 7 as like a super jazz chord 5. But don't tell anybody, because I always say that you can't substitute chord 5 at all in major keys, but you can. Shh. What else have we got? Brian, I find holding the pick tightly so as not to drop it makes it tricky to relax the hand. Yeah, 100%. Someone told me, gave me a really good tip actually the other day for people that struggle with dropping their plectrums. Because I used to get really terrible dry skin and drop plectrums all the time. And the amount of gigs where I'd just drop a plectrum in the guitar and then have to strum with my fingers. It's a nightmare, isn't it? So for all you dry-skinned people out there, if you're having problems with that, there's 2 things. Number one is there is a product now that I think Dunlop make them. Hang on a minute, I'll put a link up. This is for people that have got a couple of quid to spend on plectrum slippiness. Bear with me a minute. Let me find them. They're basically like a little silicone hat for your plectrums, so that they don't fall out of your hands as easily. And I say this now and I can't find them. I had them the other day. But anyway, if you have a look for silicone plectrum grips or something like that, you'll probably find them. I'll try and put them on the Folk Friend website. Actually, I've been meaning to get some. But anyway, that's one useful thing. The budget version is, if you can't find those, which I can't right now, the budget version is get a plectrum of a sort of medium plus thickness. I like 0.6 celluloid plectrums, which I have a big stack of because I sell them in the shop. They're my favourites. They're just cheap and cheerful. You know, we flog them for £5 for £1 in here, so they're very cheap. But if you get one of these and you get a drill and put a really small drill bit in it, if you drill like 3 or 4 little rows of small holes, then it's super grippy and you can't really drop it. And as long as you do them far enough apart, then it won't break it or anything, as long as it's a thickish plectrum. So yeah, that's my new top plectrum tip. I wish I'd known that like 15 years ago, but there we are. Never mind. So that's yeah, useful for that. Has anybody got any other things they'd like to know about? Well, while we're thinking, tomorrow, in honour of St. Patrick's Day next week, I've got a really exciting video coming out tomorrow, which I've been meaning to actually promote, and I haven't had time, really. I have sent an email out today. But yeah, I've been recording some tunes with a harpist called Tiffany Schaefer, who has a YouTube channel called Tiffany Schaefer Harp and Song, which is a really good channel with loads of interesting music on it, Irish tunes, songs, folk tunes from elsewhere in the world, all sorts of cool stuff. And she also does like harp tutorials, which are actually really interesting for guitarists as well, because a lot of the rhythmic stuff and the ways that they look at chord inversions and stuff like that give you some really interesting ideas that you can implement on the guitar as well. So I messaged her a little while ago and said, do you fancy doing a kind of crossover episode where I'll do a video for your channel and you can do one for mine? And what we've ended up doing is we've recorded 2 like duet arrangements of tunes, and then we've recorded ourselves discussing why we picked the chords for them and how they work, and rhythmic ideas that we can steal from each other, basically. So that'll be out tomorrow, and we're going to be premiering them on our respective YouTube channels. So if you go on the Folk Friend Facebook page, which is here, then tomorrow that'll be up. We're premiering them at 3 o'clock our time in the UK for Tiffany's video. I think in the States that's, well, depending which time zone you are, it's either 4 or 5 hours before, and then mine's an hour afterwards, so that'll be 4 PM UK time. So I'll put links to both of those on there tomorrow. If anyone fancies watching some nice harpy guitar-y music, and then potentially picking up some cool ideas for chord inversions and stuff like that, then tune in for that. It should be quite interesting, hopefully. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting those out there. There's been so much editing, but hopefully they'll be worth it in the end. So yeah, check them out. Beyond that, I think that's about it for today, isn't it? So unless anyone's got anything else particularly they'd like to know about, check back in tomorrow afternoon for our videos on there. Thank you all very much for tuning in, as ever. If you've got any great ideas for videos you'd like to see, topics you'd like more about, I will be doing a kind of strumming exercises video in the not too distant future. That's been on my to-do list for a while. And if you'd like to learn a lot more, my kind of complete guide to folk music backing is available. There it is, look, backing guitar techniques for traditional Celtic music. You can get it on the Folk Friend website as a downloadable ebook or as a paperback, and the ebook comes with free audio examples of everything as well. So go check that out if you haven't already. Wicked. Right, thank you all very much. Cheers, Keith. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mick. Thanks, Frank. Who else did we have? Thank you, Sean. Thanks, Ed, as ever. Yeah, really great to see so many of you on today. Thank you all very much for tuning in, and I will be back next weekend.